That's an awesome track. I am going to put my hand up and say that's probably one of the best tracks I've ever actually heard. It's called Scrambled Eggman, and you can find it on ocremix.com. It's a metal version of the Sonic 3 boss theme. I've just got this thing for old Sega games. I don't know why. They're just great. I feel the music's just fantastic. And remixes in metals and guitars, we loves it. You listen to Blue Please on WoW Radio, myself, Total Biscuit, and I'm blithering like a moron as per usual. Right. Before the break, we were talking about support trees, and I'm going to read a couple more emails before I go on and try and round off the topic, because it's just too big a topic to cover in 15 minutes, so it's really, really that simple. We've got loads of stuff. It's great that people actually email in this stuff. It is absolutely fantastic. I love it. Now, here's one from a shaman, and he says, this is from Kodots, or Thraldor, level 70 shaman on Maelstrom EU. I can't really find out which, but never mind. And he says this: hello, this might be slightly off topic, but anyway, I think the shaman, I play one, yep, talent trees are a perfect example of how I think talent trees should work as support trees to each other. All three shaman talent trees, Elemental, Enhancement and Resto, are viable to spec into as your main tree, as is expected of a hybrid class. Whichever tree you decide to go for as your main tree, there will be talents in that tree itself and the other trees which allow you to customize your build to be whatever you want it to be. Take, for example, Enhancement. Speccing into Enhancement allows the shaman class to be a reasonably heavy melee damage dealer. When you spend enough talent points to get the top tier talent, Shamanistic Rage, you will have 20 points to customize your build to do what you want with. There are several options for both PvP and PvE builds, as well as hybrid, with gear switches. Now, he says, for PvP, you have the opportunity to go for talents such as Improved Healing Wave, that's reduced cast time, and putting a couple more points in, for example, Healing Focus, which is a 5 out of 5, 70% chance to avoid interruption. Those are located in the Restoration tree. The Elemental tree, on the other hand, offers talents such as Concussion, increased damage from shocks and lightning spells. In the next tier, Elemental Warding, that's 3 out of 3, minus 12% spell damage taken, and Late Reverberation, which is, I believe, 1 second off the shock cooldown, and an element of focus, chance to enter a minus 60% mana cost clear casting state upon landing a spell crit. For PvE, there is a talent in the enhancement tree, Mental Quickness, which is shock mana cost reduced by 6%, which allows the more efficient use of shocks as part of your DPS rotation. To further enhance that aspect, there is a talent available in the first tier of talents in the elemental tree, Convection. That's a minus 10% mana cost off shocks and lightning spells. Then in the restoration tree, there's a talent in the third tier called Nature's Guidance. At 3 out of 3, increases your chance to hit with spells and melee attacks by 3%, which is very useful for any raiding enhancement shaman. All of the trees work in a similar way, providing some key supportive talents low down in all trees, allowing players to customize their spec for the purpose they intend to use it for, giving a possibility for some really nice and interesting builds. Yep. I would say that, yeah, hybrid classes have actually got it pretty good as regards to that kind of synergy between particular talent trees. In my honest opinion, I mean, I can only really speak from a mage perspective. I think mages, if anything, are very, very polarised on that, because, to be honest, you generally will not see, I've certainly never seen, anybody bothering to rotate fire and frost spells in a raid environment. I mean, why would they? It's just insane. And I am about to sneeze, so I must apologise. Right, okay, now that's out of the way. So, you never see that. You never see people rotating frostbolts and fireballs. They will pick one or the other. Mage is very polarised in that spec. You either pick one or the other. So, what you'll generally find is, well, mages don't really have the choice of fire and frost being, using fire and frost as support trees for each other. I mean, you could go and have a look at the frost tree and look at the talents which will be useful for a fire mage low down. And there's a grand total of 1. And that's in the first tier, and you take it, and it's elemental precision, and that's it. And you look at the fire tree and see if there's anything remotely useful for frost mages, and no, not really. I mean, if you're going to PvE Frost Mage and you really want to use Fire Blast, I suppose you could grab Improved Fire Blast and maybe Impact, but at the end of the day, that's pretty much a waste of talent points. What you'll generally find with mages is that there's no point. So they end up going to Arcane, which is of course where Arcane got the reputation for being a support tree from. I think that's mages may indeed, at least from the sounds of you guys, actually suffering more than any other class in that respect. It always made me wonder that if you're going to have something which does have a support tree, then your construction of your tree has to be careful. Right now, you've of course got people speccing into clear casting, and that's only on tier 2. And then you've got a lot of useful stuff which is so low down that you'd not bother taking, and then you can look at, say, elements of the Frost and Fire tree and say, well, pretty much all of these abilities are quite useful. I don't know, maybe it is mages that suffer more. It does seem to be, at least from the tone of your emails that, in fact, mages do apparently suffer more in this case. So, that's fair enough. Now, let's see if we're going to take one more email before we go on to the next topic for the day. Let's have a look. Now, got one here from Aaron Mitchell, also known as Fern, and he says this. He's Fernurian on Greyman US, and he says this: I play a warlock and have done so for the last 2 years. In that time, I've spec just about every way imaginable, and I've found that now more than ever, the warlock has no support tree. Each tree is viable in raids and PvP. This is going to be a long one. I'm not saying that locks are without their useless talents, but each tree has its pros and cons, as I shall outline here. Let's start with Affliction. For those uneducated in the warlocky ways, the Affliction tree is all about dots and debuffs. To spec fully into this tree builds the warlock for large shadow damage caused by shadow dots, as well as boosting the power of spells cast by mages, shadow priests, and the warlocks. It increases the amount of dots they can cast from 3 to 5, allowing the warlock to maintain high DPS while wanding. Also makes them very mana efficient, and through Soul Siphon becomes almost entirely self-sufficient in health, or their green mana bar as I call it. The main disadvantage is the lack of burst DPS, making killing slow. Demonology is all about demons, obviously. As far as raiding is concerned, the biggest benefits are improved imp and improved health stone. Demo is, in my opinion, mainly for small group PvP and solo players. Aside from buffing their pets, the demo tree also increases a lock's general survivability. While not the most mana efficient, demo locks can rely on their larger health pool to keep casting. With demonic knowledge, the warlock gains additional spell power, making their damage consistent. Now, the Destruction tree is focused around burst damage. Large frequent crits and the addition of Conflagrate makes a Destro Warlock a valuable asset to the ranged DPS lineup, as well as increasing the lock's effectiveness in AoE. Again, Destro locks are not very mana efficient and are very soft and squishy. By combining trees with creative and careful selection of talents, a lock can overcome the flaws of their spec to a degree, as well as create some interesting builds. For example, balancing Destruction and Affliction can make a heavy Shadow build, perfectly fitting the Frozen Shadow Weave set. Affliction and Destruction can make a very effective instant cast Shadow Bolt spam build. Demonology and Destruction can wield a crit heavy survivability build with Felguard, great for PvP and solo. Demonology and Affliction can make a tank and melt build, which is great for farming, and a creative player can make almost any combination of DPS build, including a melee build, largely gear dependent, think Ret Paladin, Cloth but Cool, which I myself have successfully made. Lots of fun and nasty in PvP thanks to the WTF factor it provides. Yeah, so at least from the emails, there is a general opinion that right now most classes are apparently working as intended. There aren't really all that many support trees at all, which kind of surprised me. I suppose from the limited perspective that I have as a mage, it really does actually genuinely surprise me that more classes are not suffering from the support tree problem, and the fact that really you can't mix and match too much with a mage because a lot of this stuff is effectively useless to you. Interesting. That's cool. Okay. I can live with that. I like being proved wrong, especially when I'm given such amazing emails from you guys. So thank you very much for emailing today. Now, I need to get on to the next topic because we are going to rapidly run out of time if we're not too careful. And that's raid timers. Now, I've been reading recently a lot of posts on the general forums and even a little bit on WoW Insider and various other good fan sites about the idea of raid timers, and particularly, why is Kara still a 7-day timer? A bit of arguing that, well, now Kara isn't really bleeding... Well, of course it isn't. You know, it's not bleeding edge raid content anymore, that the counter should be reduced to more of a Zul'Gurub kind of level. And I thought, okay, fair enough. Well, let's look at the history of things, shall we? Karazhan is, as you're well aware, the first raid you should ever attend in the Burning Crusade. And it's got a 7-day cooldown. Now, if you want to know the reason that I think behind that is it's bloody enormous. Now, seriously, Karazhan is definitely one of the biggest instances around as regards to just sheer walking. I mean, the amount of walking around you have to do. You remember back in AQ40 you had mounts, yeah? And you could ride around, and that's because that instance was bloody ginormous. Now, instances like Naxxramas, of course, didn't really have that much of a problem because it was all based around a central hub with a teleporter, and you could go to any of the 4 different wings. And, of course, that made the size of the instant virtually irrelevant. It wasn't so much linear in the sense that you could go in any direction, and you would reach a boss relatively shortly. And Garage 40 wasn't like that. It was huge, especially if you wiped. You would go back to the start. It was point A to point B with a couple of little detours here and there. It wasn't like Nax, as in, this is the hub, this is hub A, and you can now go through B, C, D, and E, whichever you wish. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't take you long to get back there. Karazhan suffers from that in the same way that Blackwing Lair suffered from it. It's a vertical instance, but it's bloody ginormous. And it is, in fact, larger than Blackwing Lair. It's bloody huge, as you'd be well aware if you've run through it. What you'll also find is, of course, that there is a hideous amount of trash in there. Now, I can understand the arguments for nerfing the raid timer. As a raider who is currently raiding the I and SSC, that would be very valuable to me, because there's still a few items I would like to grab from Karazhan, and I prefer not having to wait a week for my next shot at it. But, and here's the but, that's not really helpful for casual players, is it? That's not really helpful for the kind of player that Blizzard really wants to cater for. It's odd that people say we should nerf it so that casual players get more of a shot at higher level raiding. Now, the argument is, it's okay. I can understand the argument. The argument is this, yeah? If you reduce the Karazhan raid timer, the raid lockout, then what is going to happen is that people can gear up faster and therefore can hurl themselves into the 25-mans quicker. Yeah? Okay, I can understand that perspective. Unfortunately, what these people tend to forget is that, of course, Karazhan is not on farm for everybody. Particularly casual guilds. I was back in a casual guild at one point. I've been in a couple of casual guilds, and what I found is that Karazhan has a couple of elements which are not difficult per se, but they're relatively good at blocking inexperienced or more casual raiders that don't spend a lot of time on things. And the worst thing about it is the time it takes to actually get there. So if you're splitting your raid up into, say, chunks, I mean, let's say you're splitting up to maybe 2 or 3 hour raiding chunks, and you're not a guild that's got this on farm stats. Now, Karazhan's going to take quite a while to get through if you don't have it in farm stats. There's a lot of trash, some of it's quite tricky, some of the bosses can be a pain. I mean, I cite as my example the usual places where people get stopped. The Curator, for a little while. People get stopped there. None of the bosses up to there are particularly difficult. I suppose maybe you might stop at Morose for one night, if you really don't know what you're doing. But aside from that, Maiden is not remotely difficult. Achiman, as you're well aware, is a cakewalk. The Opera event is free loot. So you're looking at Curator as being your first block. Now, that trash is on like a 45-minute respawn timer, which of course is going to mean you can wipe a couple of times on Curator, bearing in mind the inordinate amount of time it takes to run back to him after you wipe. And rezzing there is possible, but in a 10-man, of course, you don't have that much wipe protection. So you generally have to end up running back. And that takes a long time. So you get maybe 2, maximum 3 attempts before you have to re-clear the trash. Now, as you're well aware, every time you kill a boss in Karazhan, a lot of the trash then disappears the next time you go in there. And that's good, because that allows you to progress at whatever pace you really like through the instance. Now, by spreading that out through a 7-day timer, you've made that effectively casual-friendly. And you'll have seen that some casuals cry about it, but that's just because they suck. Let's face it. They cry about this for no good reason whatsoever, simply because they just want an easier ride, and because they're so inexperienced with the game, they don't even know how to get it. They don't even know what they want. They say, well, reduce the timer. I'm like, okay, right, well, all that's going to end up doing is, well, when you hit a boss that's going to cause you trouble, like Shade of Aran, like Ilhoof, like to some lesser degree Netherspire, and then, of course, Prince Malchezaar. When you hit the more difficult fights in there, you're going to get screwed, because you're on a 3-day timer. You might get maybe 1 night of tries. You're raiding 2 or 3 nights a week. Well, what happens if they don't turn up next night? Oh, look, it's reset. You've got to do the whole thing again. You're never going to get to Malchezaar at this rate. You don't have enough time. The instance is too large. I mean, if any reason there, that's the reason right there. And you can argue, well, AQ40 had a 3-day timer. Zul'Gurub had AQ20 had a 2-day timer. Zul'Gurub had a 3-day timer. Yeah, okay. They both had 3-day timers. Now look at the design of the instance. Did that instance at any point force you to go from boss to boss in a very, very linear fashion and clear a shed load of trash in order to do it? No. Because the way it was constructed allowed you to deal with it in a somewhat non-linear fashion. And of course, by non-linear, I mean you got to choose to some degree which boss you did first. Now, you can say that Karazhan's kind of like that. At least you could if you didn't ignore the fact that you still have to clear a shed load of trash, and it's from top to bottom. Yep, you go up the tower. You do not go on the side of the tower, you do not go around the tower, you go up the tower. So, any idea of non-linearity pretty much goes out the window because you've still got to clear a bunch of trash. Yeah, I could go and do a Netherspite instead of Shade of Aran, but I'm still clearing more trash, and that's a lot more time spent, and there's a lot of trash in there. Zul'Gurub was different. Zul'Gurub allowed you to avoid various areas and get to different bosses around, it took around the same amount of time to get to one boss that it did to the other boss. It wouldn't really make a difference. Take them in any order you want. They didn't really care. AQ20 was the same. As soon as you'd beaten the second boss, Rageaxe, you got to choose. You could go and do pretty much all of these bosses, and you can avoid a shed load of trash by doing so. Which is why they were able to be 3-day timers. Small instances, not a lot of trash, and you choose your bosses. So if you're going to attempt a boss, you can just keep attempting that boss until you get him down. Karazhan, not so. You can't just go in there and get straight to Prince Malchezaar to attempt him. It's not like clearing, Rajax and Kuranax and then going and attempting a Syrian, like in AQ20. You can't do that. And therein lies the problem. Might come back to this after the break. A couple more ideas perhaps to make raiding casual friendly without removing the challenge. Impossible? We shall see. You're listening to Blue Police here on WoW Radio. Here's a little bit of Nubcake news for you. Enjoy.
Nubcake news!
Stop that. Welcome to this week's edition of Nubcake News. Coming up later in the programme, we take a look at the new mage changes, including the deletion of arcane missiles. Well, come on, no one really used it anyway. And Mage Armor's new feature, random icons, a new one every time. The mystery button that no one uses. Look, this one's a kitten. Come on, and roll a mage. But first, it seems that players are becoming a little unhappy with the state of play as more and more demand new and different server variants. You may have heard of players asking for level 60 servers, arena-less servers, battleground-less servers, and servers with more cowbell. However, these are simply the concerns of a forum community, and are, as such, stupid. Nubcake News decided to dig deeper into this issue by infiltrating Blizzard HQ using invisible mages. This took approximately 3 hours due to the short duration of the invisibility spell and resulted in most of them getting horribly lost. They ended up in the StarCraft Ghost development room, in which they found a large cage filled with a apparently infinite number of monkeys, typewriters, and a small sign reading, "We think the N64 is a viable platform for this title." After some sneaking about, in which one unfortunate mage aggroed Chris Metzen and was turned into a large purple tentacle thing with miniguns for eyes and as such, the main protagonist for the next expansion, our intrepid stealth mages found themselves in the Chamber of Terrifying Possibilities, also known as the Patch Notes Room. Rifling through Blizzard's notes, we found a variety of doodles which included what appeared to be a lightsaber-wielding octopus with the title, "Druids wanted this form, but druids are too good," spelt G-U-D. "We will make this a retribution talent." Eventually, we tracked down a top-secret design document entitled New Server Types, which we can now exclusively reveal to you live on air. Presented to you the new first server type in Batch 2.2, Tauren-only realms, where the overrated cows will be able to graze freely and free of any demands that they move their fat beefy arses out of my damn field of view before I turn it into a Big Mac and feed it to the Guildmaster. After some careful analysis, Nubcake News has determined that this is in fact a carefully planned hoax, since Big Macs are in fact made of people, and cows are not people. The next server type was called only Hardcore. It contained various doodles of inverted hunters, what appeared to be a raid boss made entirely out of dark glares, and a single line reading, "Permadeath, la 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 la, 90% of the WoW community wants this. Maybe if we take away potion cooldown, they'll forget that we're supposed to be making Diablo 3. In a not too popular deathmatch game Fable, the next server type read Gnome Punting, in which weapons in raid and PvP environments would be banned. Since your opponent could have a better weapon than you do, and that's clearly unfair, we're all paying the same for this game, I quit Blizz, kid thinks bye. Weapons would be replaced with puntable gnomes, which players must punt towards the enemy's weak spot for massive damage. Well, we had to find a use for gnomes somewhere, am I right? Last but not least, we're proud to present what we call the Vanilla Server, in which Blizzard hopes to fix everyone's problems, all in one foul swoop. This server has no classes, no races or racials, and no factions. Rep grinds have been removed, as have all raid instances, battlegrounds, arenas, trade skills, talents, gold requirements, level requirements, hotkeys, skill buttons, weapons, armor, consumables, items, trinkets, mongoose, gorillas, cities, towns, flight points, flight paths, spells, combos, mana bars, rage bars, energy bars, mounts, murkies, lions, tigers, Kenya, Norway, trade channel, LFG channel, general channel, Baron's chat, Darnassus just because we hate it, raid bosses, outdoor raid bosses, indoor raid bosses, flying raid bosses, underground raid bosses, environmentally friendly raid bosses, did I mention raid bosses, epics, rares, uncommons, commons, vendor trash, BOPs, BOEs, soulblood items, tradable items, untradable items, bullets, arrows, ranged weapons, melee weapons, combat pets, non-combat pets, ground, sky, and epic flying mounts, standard flying mounts, epic mounts, standard mounts, turtle mounts, invisible bikes, catapults, trebuchets, any other siege engine of any kind, invisible or otherwise, cloak of shadows 3 times over, and warlocks. The possibilities are endless and fun is on its way. This has been Nubcake News. Good night.